Hey everyone, and welcome back. So today we're going to be doing a performance review for Hollow Knight SILKSONG, basically comparing the performance on Nintendo Switch 1 to Nintendo Switch 2, and also discussing the performance in 60 FPS to 120 FPS. Now, if this is your first time watching one of these videos of mine, I'm going to start out by giving my thoughts overall on the performance on both of the systems and on the different modes, highlighted by a few examples. After that, you're going to be getting side-by-side comparisons of docked and handheld mode. Now, if you aren't interested in my thoughts and you just want those side-by-side comparison videos, they will be timestamped down below. You can always check those out directly. I will also mention that today's video is going to be a little awkward. Awkward in a good sense though, because pretty much everything is good news on both systems. So it does make a video like this a little bit awkward because often you point out the flaws in each version of the game. In this case, I'll be pointing out the differences and discussing what you can expect on each system, but I've got to say it's pretty good news overall. Like I said, for both systems, you're pretty much going to be getting a great experience whether you're playing on Switch 1 or Switch 2. And before we get lost in those comparisons, I also want to give some props to Team Cherry. Their $20 release price is phenomenal. And I've got to say, it's going to be putting some other developers to shame, and I think they've actually maybe made some enemies in the industry, because if you're going to be releasing a Metroidvania or a similar type game in the next few months, you have a new measuring stick that you're going to have to surpass if you want to sell your game for more than $20, and people still say that it's a pretty good value. And I actually think Team Cherry could have easily gone for a $40 price point here, and most people would have still thought it's an amazing deal based on the hype that people had for the release of this game and the overall quality. But no, they decided to back their fans and make this game what I think is really accessible to all, both on the price point and the gameplay as well. There is a steep learning curve in the beginning, but I do think that releasing the game for this amazing price and with this quality is not only going to support the existing fans of the series, but is really going to allow for new people to come in and really appreciate the beauty of this game. Now, on the flip side, I know that not every developer can allow themselves to do this because this is an extremely small team of people that released a game over 7 years, but I still think we need to give them props because it took some guts to stick with such an amazing price point. But that's enough babbling. Let's get into the performance review. Just remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. It really helps out a smaller channel like mine, and it is appreciated a ton. Now, I do want to mention the footage that will be used are of the first 10 minutes of the game. I simply needed a part of the game that I could reproduce gameplay almost identically 4 times over, and that was the easiest way to do so. But overall, it is very indicative of the overall performance. I've played more than 4 hours both on Switch 2 and Switch 1, and overall, the examples of performance in the video will be very comparable overall. So first, let's start out with a few of the basics. For the Nintendo Switch 1, the game runs at 60 FPS with a max resolution in dock mode of 1080p. However, for the Nintendo Switch 2, the max resolution ups to 4K in dock mode, and you have the choice between 60 FPS and 120 FPS if you have a monitor or TV that supports it. Now, to be able to do a side-by-side video later on, I do want to mention that both games on screen will appear in 1080p. However, I'm downscaling the 4K footage that I took in dock mode into a 1080p format, simply because I can't have a video running at 4K and 1080p on the same screen. And in that case, you sort of have to use the lower of the two resolutions to be fair to both games. However, the smoothness of the frame rate and the performance that you will see is exactly what you will expect, however, upscaled to 4K. Secondly, you won't see any 120 FPS footage throughout the review today. And if you're wondering why, well, that's because YouTube only supports a maximum of 60 FPS. So even if I tried rendering the 120 FPS footage for a video today, you would only see 60 FPS in the end, and you would just see the drop in resolution without the boost in frame rate. So when we get to that part of the review, I'll give you my experience in both versions of the game at 60 and 120 FPS, but I just can't show you the footage from a technical perspective. So let's start with the comparison between the Switch 1 and Switch 2 performance. Now, as I said earlier, pretty much today's video is all good news, and the reason why is that if you're playing on Nintendo Switch 1, well, the frame rate is buttery smooth at 60 FPS throughout the whole game. If you're playing in handheld mode, there is a slight drop in resolution to 720p, but the game is still running buttery smooth at that full 60 FPS. In reality, the only time I was able to even notice a frame rate drop during the gameplay is when it was actually voluntary. Because when you kill an enemy or during some effects, the screen like sort of freezes for a second, and they actually do that through a play with the frame rate. And whether you're playing on any platform with any system, no matter how powerful it is, you'll get that same drop at that exact same moment. And if we compare the footage to the Nintendo Switch 2, well, if you're playing both games at 1080p, I've got to tell you, the footage is almost indistinguishable. If you freeze a frame here and there, yes, you will notice a little bit crisper lines on the Nintendo Switch 2 version in different areas, but if you don't do that, I'll be honest, if you didn't know which footage was which, I would dare you to try to guess. And I've got to say, this is surprising and is actually probably an example of great optimization, especially given how more interactive the visuals are in this game. I mean, Hollow Knight 1 was a visually beautiful game, but they've put even more in this game, especially in the forefront. Hollow Knight was known for having like multiple layers to the visuals, but this one I've got to really say there's a lot more animated visuals in the forefront this time, and it's actually really great for immersion. And even with those added details, the game still running like this is actually, like I said, probably an example of really, really high level optimization. Now, if we shift over to handheld mode, however, we do see a slight bigger difference between the two versions of the game. Number one, the resolution does drop a little bit in handheld mode for the Nintendo Switch 1, leading to slightly crisper lines on the Nintendo Switch 2. But I've got to say, the bigger screen is also a really big help, especially immersion-wise on the Nintendo Switch 2. Those few extra inches really, really do help out in the end. However, at the same time, most people won't be running both versions of the game side by side like we are, so I wouldn't feel bad about playing the game in handheld mode on Nintendo Switch 1. It's simply, if you do have the choice, I would select the Nintendo Switch 2. So now, let's talk about the Nintendo Switch 2 version of the game specifically, comparing the 60 FPS to the 120 FPS. And this is maybe going to be the most surprising section for some people in this performance review, just because my thoughts on the issue might not line up with everyone's. But personally, number one, it's important to note that there is a resolution drop when you go to 120 FPS. So rather than just being a better version of the game, I actually equate this more to a performance to quality version of the game. As some games offer on Switch 2 or other consoles, you're trading off resolution for better frame rate. Now, where I do think this differs from, let's say, the general gameplay out there, is that when you're choosing between performance and quality like this on most games, you're often choosing between somewhere around 30 FPS versus 60 FPS. And I've got to say that when you're comparing 30 to 60, I always will choose performance mode on a 100% basis, because I do think that the difference between 30 and 60 FPS is very noticeable to the human eye. However, when you're looking at the performance between 60 and 120 FPS, I'm not going to say it's not noticeable. It is. However, I do think it's one of those situations of slightly diminishing returns of going from 60 to 120 FPS, where perceptually, the difference is not as noticeable as going from around 30 to 60 FPS. I personally will be playing more likely at 60 FPS because I do appreciate the better visuals, and at 60 FPS the gameplay is already smooth enough where I don't really feel like I'm missing out. And at least from a personal perspective, when I was playing at 120 FPS, the game ended up feeling so smooth that it actually felt a bit floaty, and I prefer that sort of like crisper type of movement. Now, that's not saying that the 120 FPS is not the way to play. I just think that it's going to be a much more personal decision than some other games out there. And I do see an argument for playing at both 60 and 120 FPS, which by the way is probably why Team Cherry didn't just release one version of the game that is locked at 120 FPS and left that toggle on there so you can actually choose between the two. Because most likely in testing the game, some people like better the 60 FPS version with crisper visuals, while other people really appreciated the extreme smoothness of that 120 FPS. Also, on a side note, when I'm talking about this dropped resolution in 120 FPS, it's not this massive drop. The game is still extremely pleasing visually. It still looks great overall. However, if you are looking at them side by side on panels that are supporting both of the formats, you do nonetheless realize that there is a slight drop in that resolution. Now, as I said earlier, this does make for a slightly awkward video because there's almost nothing negative to point out here. There's just basically differences to highlight. But I've got to say, I'm really glad that we are making this performance review video just so that anyone out there that was maybe holding off on buying it on Switch 1 really doesn't have to worry about it at all, especially that the upgrade to Switch 2 is free after that. You definitely should pick up the game right away on Switch 1, enjoy it a ton, and then if one day you pick it up on Switch 2, enjoy the upgrade. I'm also really glad to finally be done with this performance review because rather than replaying the same sections of the games over again, I can now finally move on with my main playthrough of the game, finish it up, and ideally put out a full review. So don't forget, I'm going to leave you guys with the footage, but on the way out, if you haven't yet, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already.
Friend! Hey, come on. Hey, look, Ababa, Finek. Prataka,
Nesvir,
Mimido,
Temirian,
Orala,
Cadestre,
Fa, Yuma, Orala.
Manera.
Torotan.
Cadestre.
Coro cartello.
Da finestra.
Finel. Fine. Torotano.